There is a specter that haunts the modern imagination, a cliché of failure and regret. We call it the midlife crisis. We picture the man who suddenly quits his stable job, buys a ridiculous red sports car, and leaves his family. We picture the woman who feels invisible, desperately trying to recapture the beauty and vitality of her youth. It's often portrayed as a joke, a pathetic last-ditch attempt to deny the reality of aging. But what if this entire narrative is wrong? What if the midlife crisis is not a breakdown, but a profound and necessary breakthrough? Carl Jung, the great Swiss psychiatrist, offered a powerful and compassionate reframing of this crucial life stage. He saw it not as a regression into childishness, but as a spiritual emergency, a desperate call from the soul to begin the most important journey of our lives. He called this the afternoon of life. He believed that the goals and values that successfully carried us through the morning of our lives are not meant to sustain us in the afternoon. To continue living by the old rules is to invite psychological stagnation and despair. The anxiety, the depression, the feeling of meaninglessness that so often strikes at midlife is not a sign that you have failed. It is a sign that your soul is demanding a change of program. It is an invitation to stop climbing and to start digging, to turn from the outer world of success and to begin the inner world of meaning. To understand the crisis of the afternoon, we must first appreciate the necessary work of the morning of life. Jung proposed that from birth until roughly the age of 35 or 40, our primary psychological task is adaptation to the outer world. This is the time for building a strong and functional ego. We must learn the rules of society, get an education, develop skills, find a career, and establish our place in the collective. This is the great adventure of climbing the mountain of external reality. We create a social mask, a persona that allows us to interact effectively with others. We focus our energy on achieving tangible goals, the degree, the job, the house, the family. This is not a superficial pursuit. It is a heroic and essential one. We are like the sun in the morning, gathering our strength and climbing higher in the sky, illuminating the world, extending our reach. The values of this life stage are ambition, competition, growth, and adaptation. We learn to suppress the parts of ourselves that don't fit the collective ideal. We might push aside our artistic dreams for a more practical career, or hide our vulnerability to appear strong. We do what is necessary to survive and thrive in the external world. And for many, this brings great success. We build a life, a career, an identity. We reach a certain peak on the mountain, a point where we have achieved many of the goals we set for ourselves. We have, by all external measures, made it. The morning's work is complete. The sun has reached its zenith, high noon. You have reached the summit. The sun is at high noon. This should be a moment of ultimate triumph. You have done everything you were supposed to. You have achieved the goals of the morning. Yet instead of a feeling of deep fulfillment, a strange and unsettling feeling begins to creep in. A sense of emptiness, a quiet, persistent question, is this all there is? This is the psychological reality at the heart of the midlife crisis. It is the shocking discovery that the top of the mountain is not the final destination you thought it would be. The values that drove you with such force in the morning, ambition, success, social approval, suddenly lose their power. The achievements that once defined you now feel hollow. Jung recognized that this is not a sign of personal failure or mental illness. It is a natural, predictable, and necessary stage of human development. The goals of the morning have been achieved, and therefore the psychic energy that fueled that climb has nowhere left to go. The program has run its course. Continuing to live by the same principles of the morning, trying to climb even higher to accumulate even more, becomes a sterile and meaningless pursuit. It is like the sun having reached its zenith, trying to climb higher still, which is impossible. The psyche is signaling that a profound change is required. The feeling of depression, boredom, and meaninglessness at midlife is the soul's way of telling you that it is time to turn around. It is time to begin the journey into the afternoon of life, a journey with a completely different set of goals, values, and directions. The crisis is not that you are lost, it is that you are finally ready to find a new path. As the sun passes its zenith, its program changes. Its goal is no longer to ascend and expand its light, but to descend and gracefully illuminate the world as it moves towards sunset. For Jung, this was the perfect metaphor for the afternoon of life. The psychological task fundamentally shifts. The first half of life was about building a strong ego and adapting to the outer world. The second half of life is about turning inward and adapting to the inner world. It is the journey of individuation. Individuation is the process of becoming the whole unique and undivided individual you were always meant to be. It is a journey of self-realization, of connecting with the true center of your psyche, the self. The soul is now calling for a new kind of growth. Not the growth of expansion, but the growth of depth. It wants you to stop focusing on your persona, your social mask, and to start exploring the parts of yourself you left behind on the climb up the mountain. It wants you to confront your shadow, the disowned dark side of your personality. It wants you to build a relationship with your inner feminine or masculine, the anima or animus. It wants you to discover a personal meaning that is not dictated by society, but that arises from your own deepest core. This is a terrifying prospect for the ego, which has spent its entire existence building a successful identity in the outer world. The ego wants to cling to the familiar, sunlit peak. But the self, the wise center of the psyche, knows that true wholeness can only be found by courageously descending into the shadowy valleys on the other side of the mountain. The midlife crisis is this very moment of tension, the ego wanting to cling to the past and the self calling it toward the future. When the call to individuation comes, it rarely announces itself politely. It often erupts from the unconscious in disruptive and confusing ways. The parts of your personality that you repressed or neglected during the morning of life now come knocking at the door of your consciousness, demanding to be heard. This is the return of the repressed. The successful, logical businessman who suppressed his artistic side might suddenly find himself obsessed with an urge to paint or write poetry. The devoted, nurturing mother who sacrificed her own ambitions might feel a sudden, powerful surge of desire to start a new career or go back to school. The easygoing, conflict-avoidant person might experience inexplicable fits of rage as their disowned, aggressive shadow breaks through. The rational pragmatist might start having intensely spiritual or mystical dreams. Jung believed these seemingly out-of-character impulses are not random. They are the psyche's attempt to correct a one-sidedness. The soul is striving for balance. It is bringing forth the opposite qualities to make the personality whole. If you have lived your life entirely through your thinking function, your feeling function will erupt, demanding that the heart be given a voice. If you have lived entirely as a persona, your shadow will emerge, forcing you to confront the parts of yourself you have denied. These impulses can be terrifying. They threaten the stable identity the ego has worked so hard to build. The temptation is to pathologize them, to see them as a crisis or a sign that you are losing your mind. But from a Jungian perspective, these are healing signals. They are messengers from the self pointing the way towards the forgotten territories of your own soul that you must now have the courage to explore. The call to begin the afternoon's journey has been sent, but the ego, the king of the morning, often refuses to listen. It is terrified of the descent, terrified of the unknown, terrified of letting go of the identity that brought it so much success. What happens when we ignore the call? What happens when we try to artificially extend the morning into the afternoon? This, Jung would say, is the source of the true midlife crisis in its most negative stereotypical form. When we refuse to turn inward, the psychic energy that should be fueling our individuation journey has nowhere to go. So it stagnates and turns destructive, or it forces us into a desperate, backward-looking caricature of life. This is where we see the cliches. The attempt to recapture youth becomes literal. We cling to younger partners, we adopt the fashions and habits of a generation half our age in a futile attempt to deny the natural turning of the seasons. We become rigid and conservative, desperately defending the values and achievements of our past because we have no vision for the future. We might throw ourselves into our work with even more frantic energy, trying to climb higher on a mountain that has no more peaks, leading to burnout and a deeper sense of emptiness. Or we may fall into depression and addiction, trying to numb the persistent nagging feeling that our life has gone off course, that we have lost our soul. All of these destructive patterns are the result of a single fundamental error, a resistance to a necessary and natural psychological change. The crisis is not the call to change itself. The crisis is our refusal to answer the call. It is the suffering we endure when we cling to the shore of the familiar, while the great ship of our soul is trying to set sail for a new and undiscovered continent. How then do we answer the call? How do we avoid the trap of the negative midlife crisis? Do we work crisis and instead embark on the great adventure of individuation? It begins with a single essential quality: courage, specifically the courage to descend. Our culture worships ascent. We celebrate growth, expansion, and climbing ever higher. The idea of a voluntary descent, of turning away from the summit, feels like failure. But in the afternoon of life, the greatest courage is not in climbing higher, but in turning inward. It is the courage to let go of the identity you have so carefully constructed. It is the courage to admit that you do not have all the answers, to embrace uncertainty, and to say, I don't know where I am going, but I know I cannot stay here. This is a profound act of faith. It is a shift from relying solely on the bright, logical light of the ego to learning to trust the dim, intuitive light of the unconscious. It means consciously deciding to explore the parts of yourself you have ignored. It means taking your dreams seriously. It means examining your projections. It means questioning the very values that you once held as absolute truths. This descent is not a passive falling. It is an active exploration. It requires just as much skill, strength, and consciousness as the climb up, but it is a different kind of strength. It is not the strength of conquering, but the strength of surrendering. It is surrendering the ego's desperate need for control to the deeper wisdom of the self. It is the courageous act of getting into the boat even without a map and trusting that the currents of your own soul know the way home. The journey into the afternoon of life is not just a journey away from the old values, but a journey towards a new set of tasks and goals. The focus shifts from the outer world to the inner. The primary task is no longer about finding success, but about finding meaning. This meaning is not something that can be given to you by society. It must be discovered within. It is a deeply personal and unique quest. One of the new tasks is integrating the unconscious. This means building a conscious relationship with the parts of yourself you previously ignored, your shadow, your anima, or animus, your neglected functions. It's about becoming a whole four-dimensional human being, not just a one-sided persona. Another task is the development of your spiritual life. Jung observed that the second half of life is naturally oriented towards religious or spiritual questions. Having tended to the needs of the body and the ego, the soul now asks about its own nature. What is the meaning of my life? What is my relationship to the eternal, to the divine? This does not necessarily mean formal religion, but the cultivation of a personal connection to a transcendent reality. The focus also shifts from doing to being. The morning was about action, achievement, and making your mark on the world. The afternoon is about cultivating your inner state. It is about learning to simply be, to find joy in the present moment, and to develop the useless but soul-sustaining parts of life like creativity, play, and contemplation. Ultimately, the goal is to shift your center of gravity from the ego to the self. It is to find that unshakable inner foundation, that quiet center of wholeness, and to allow its wisdom to guide your remaining years. It's about preparing not just for a successful life, but for a meaningful death. Jung had a brilliant and compassionate term for the chaos and turmoil of the midlife transition. He called it the second puberty. Think back to your first puberty. It was a time of immense change and confusion. Your body was transforming in ways you couldn't control. Your emotions were overwhelming and unpredictable. You were struggling to figure out your identity, breaking away from your parents and trying to find your place among your peers. It was a messy, awkward, and often painful process, but we accept it as a necessary stage of development that leads to adulthood. The midlife crisis, Jung argued, is a puberty of the soul. It is just as necessary and often just as messy. The stable identity you built in the first half of life, your adult persona, no longer fits. The psyche is preparing to shed this old skin and grow into a new, more expansive form. And this shedding process is not neat and tidy. It can involve emotional turmoil that feels just as overwhelming as teenage angst. It can involve a radical questioning of your identity. If I am not my job and I am not just a parent, then who am I? It can involve a necessary rebellion against the parental authorities of your life, the societal expectations and internal rules that you have lived by for decades. It can feel like a complete dissolution of your old self, a descent into chaos where you don't know who you are anymore. This can be terrifying. But just like the first puberty, this second puberty is, puberty is not a regression. It is a progression. It is the painful, awkward, but absolutely essential transition from the first adulthood of the ego to the second, more profound adulthood of the self. It is the necessary chaos that precedes the birth of a wiser, more authentic, and more whole human being. What is the final vision of a life lived in harmony with this natural cycle? What does the afternoon of life look like when the crisis is not resisted, but embraced as a call to individuation? The result is not a sad decline into old age, but a graceful culmination of a life fully lived. The goal of the morning was expansion and achievement. The goal of the afternoon is wisdom and meaning. A person who has successfully navigated this transition radiates a quiet authority. They have less to prove and more to share. They have shifted their focus from accumulating more for themselves to contributing their unique gifts to the world to guiding the next generation. They have, as Jung put it, become a culture bearer. They have a new relationship with time. They are no longer racing against it, but flowing with it. They understand that every season of life has its own unique beauty and purpose, from the budding growth of spring to the rich harvest of autumn. They have made peace with their own shadow, so they are less judgmental of others. They have integrated their inner masculine and feminine, so their relationships are more balanced and whole. And most importantly, they have established a strong conscious connection to the self, their own inner center. This gives them a profound sense of inner peace and resilience that is not dependent on external circumstances. They are not free from suffering, but they no longer fear it in the same way, for they have learned that it is often the very fire that forges the soul into gold. This is Jung's powerful, life-affirming vision. The midlife crisis is not an ending. It is the beginning of the second and perhaps most important half of your life's great journey. It is the soul's sacred invitation to become whole,